Welcome to the final video of part 9 of our discussion on sustainable asset management. We ended last time on the anti-ESG backlash, and here is its most dramatic single casualty. The Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, a voluntary coalition in which asset managers pledged to steer their portfolios toward net zero emissions, grew at its height to represent tens of trillions of dollars in committed assets under management. It looked like one of the great successes of climate finance. The world's biggest managers publicly committed to net zero. And then, in January 2025, it suspended its activities after BlackRock and other major United States managers withdrew. When the largest asset manager on Earth walks out, a voluntary club representing the industry can't really claim to represent it anymore. Now, here's the pattern I want you to see, because we've watched it happen 3 times now in this course. This is the third major net zero financial alliance to fracture. In part 6, we saw the bank's net zero banking alliance strain and shed members. In part 7, we saw the Net Zero Insurance Alliance collapse outright. And now, in part 9, the Asset Managers Alliance suspends itself. 3 sectors, 3 voluntary net zero coalitions, 3 failures under legal and political pressure. The lesson could not be clearer, and it's one of the most important takeaways of the entire course. Voluntary climate commitments are fragile. When the political and legal winds turn hostile, pledges that aren't backed by binding regulations simply melt away. Good intentions, freely given, can be just as freely withdrawn. It's worth asking why these alliances keep collapsing, because the reason is instructive. A voluntary net zero pledge asks members to constrain their own business, to turn away certain clients, vote against certain managements, forego certain profitable investments. That's bearable when everyone else is doing it and the politics are friendly. But the moment a powerful actor decides the constraint is too costly, or that the legal risk, remember the antitrust threats aimed at these alliances, is too high, the incentive to defect becomes overwhelming. And once a few big members leave, the club loses both its credibility and its cover, so others rush for the exit too. It's a textbook collective action problem. Everyone would prefer a world where all managers stay committed, but each individually is better off leaving once leaving becomes acceptable. This is precisely why economists argue that decarbonization ultimately needs binding rules, a carbon price, emissions trading schemes, hard regulation, rather than voluntary pledges. Goodwill is real, but it is not a substitute for law. Before we wrap up, a quick look at a corner of the industry you might not expect to find here. Hedge funds, even hedge funds, the aggressive, return-seeking end of finance, now market ESG. So do their sustainability claims hold up? The researchers Liang, Sun, and Teo studied exactly this, and their findings will sound familiar by now. Many self-described responsible hedge funds actually underperformed, and some had signed the Principles for Responsible Investment, the PRI, while behaving no differently from their non-signatory peers. Once again, the commitment functioned as a marketing signal rather than a genuine change in behavior. It's the same story we saw with mutual funds under Kim and Yoon, now repeated in the hedge fund world. And it points to the single most important structural fact about this whole industry, which I'd put like this: ESG, branding like this. ESG, branding spread faster than ESG substance. The label raced ahead across every corner of asset management, mutual funds, ETFs, even hedge funds, while the real, costly, behavior-changing work lagged far behind. That gap between branding and substance is, in a sentence, the central problem of sustainable asset management. So where is all this heading? Let me offer 4 threads for the future. First, the big shift is from labels to substance. After years of loose branding, regulators are now actively policing what ESG and sustainable are actually allowed to mean. The ESMA naming rules are just the start. The easy years of slapping a green label on anything are ending. Second, the center of gravity is shifting from exclusion toward transition investing and credible engagement. Rather than simply dumping brown stocks, the smarter money is moving brown stocks. The smarter money is moving toward financing and pushing companies through their transition, which, as we've seen, is where real impact actually lives. Third, expect a widening divide between Europe and the United States, tightening disclosure and duty in Europe, retrenchment and political hostility in America. Global managers will increasingly have to run two different playbooks. And fourth, the ultimate test now facing the whole industry, proving real-world impact, not just collecting ESG fees. After a decade of asset gathering, the pressure is finally on to show that all this sustainable money actually changes something in the real economy. That is the challenge that will define the next decade of sustainable asset management. Let me offer a balanced closing thought, because it would be easy to leave this chapter feeling purely cynical, and that would be a mistake. Yes, the evidence exposes a great deal of greenwashing, weak stewardship, and marketing running ahead of substance. But step back. A decade ago, sustainable asset management barely existed as a category. Today it's $3 trillion, with regulators writing detailed rules, academics running rigorous tests, and the whole industry being held to account in a way that was unimaginable before. The very studies we've discussed, the uncomfortable ones, are themselves a sign of a maturing field, one now being measured seriously rather than taken on faith. The greenwashing is being caught precisely because the scrutiny has grown up. So the honest verdict is neither the marketer's hype nor the cynic's dismissal. Sustainable asset management is a real, imperfect, rapidly maturing industry that has overpromised and underdelivered on impact, but is now under pressure from regulators, researchers, and even its political opponents, slowly being forced to make good on its claims. Watching whether it succeeds is one of the most interesting stories in all of finance. Let me draw the whole chapter together with 6 takeaways. 1. Sustainable asset management sits inside a double agency chain, savers to managers to firms, and at every link, whose preferences really count gets blurred. 2. The market is large, around $3.2 trillion, but it's concentrated in a few giants, heavily Europe-centric, and now stalling. 3. ESG funds show no reliable alpha and charge higher fees, and much of the past green outperformance was flow-driven, not a permanent edge. 4. The evidence of greenwashing is real and serious. Raghunandan and Rajgopal on holdings, Kim and Yoon on the PRI. And selection is not the same as impact, as Heath and co-authors showed. 5. Engagement, not divestment, is the credible channel for real-world change, but it is costly and chronically undersupplied. And 6. Regulation is tightening in the European Union, even as a political backlash drives outflows in the United States. If you take one sentence from this chapter, let it be this. In sustainable asset management, the marketing has consistently run ahead of the substance, and the whole future of the field depends on closing that gap. This slide and the next collect the sources, and I'd warmly encourage you to read the originals. Several are among the most important recent papers in all of sustainable finance. The academic literature here includes Raghunandan and Rajgopal on whether ESG funds make stakeholder-friendly investments, Kim and Yoon on the PRI as a marketing signal, Heath and co-authors on selection versus transformation, Burke and Van Binsbergen on the true impact of impact investing, Dimson, Caracas, and Lee on active ownership, Azar and co-authors on the Big Three and carbon emissions, Berg, Kolbel, and Rigobon on rating divergence, and Bebchuk and Hurst on index funds and corporate governance. Try to remember the concepts of common ownership and ESG rating divergence. And the final slide gathers the policy, data, and further reading. Morningstar's Global Sustainable Fund flows reports, which gave us the market figures, the ESMA guidelines on fund names, the European Union's SFDR, and the MiFID II Sustainability Preference Rules, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission's enforcement order against DWS. That brings us to the end of Part 9. We've seen an industry of enormous scale and influence, sincerely wanted by millions of savers, but caught between genuine impact and sophisticated greenwashing, and now buffeted by a fierce political backlash. In the next part of the course, we turn to climate and carbon finance, the markets and instruments built specifically to price and reduce emissions. Thank you for watching, and see you there.